What if the greatest influence over your life is not your conscious mind, but the part of you that you never truly meet? Modern psychology has long suspected that human beings are not as self-directed as they believe. Beneath deliberate choices lies an invisible infrastructure of impulses, fears, and forgotten memories, collectively known as the shadow. Carl Jung used the term to describe the repressed or disowned aspects of personality that continue to shape one's behavior outside awareness. For the 13th century philosopher Ibn Arabi, this idea extends beyond psychology into metaphysics. He saw what we call the shadow not merely as the darkness of the unconscious, but as an ontological necessity, a mirror through which the divine perceives its own attributes under the conditions of limitation. From this view, the shadow that lives your life is not evil, pathological, or accidental. It is the unseen pattern through which consciousness experiences itself. To grasp this fully, we must first understand how modern thought divides light and darkness, and how Ibn Arabi dissolves that boundary. Contemporary culture promotes a belief in rational autonomy, the idea that individuals consciously direct their choices, yet neuroscience and cognitive psychology tell a different story. Studies show that the brain initiates decisions before the subject becomes aware of choosing. Most mental activity occurs beneath the level of conscious awareness. Emotional biases, implicit memories, and conditioned patterns govern much of daily life. When emotions like anger, fear, or shame are repressed rather than processed, they do not disappear. Instead, they re-emerge as projection, the tendency to see one's own unacknowledged traits in others. This mechanism underlies many interpersonal conflicts and moral judgments. The cultural obsession with positivity and self-presentation intensifies this split. People are encouraged to brand themselves rather than understand themselves. When unwanted emotions are suppressed, the brain's emotional alarm system remains overactive, increasing anxiety and stress. So the question arises, if unconscious forces are shaping thought and behavior, who or what is truly living our lives? For Ibn Arabi, this question is not only psychological but metaphysical. The hidden side of human experience, he suggests, is not an error in design. It is the very mechanism through which being reveals itself. Ibn Arabi, known as the greatest master, developed one of the most sophisticated models of consciousness in pre-modern philosophy. His doctrine of the unity of being holds that all existence is a single reality manifesting itself in infinite forms. There is only one consciousness, diversified by the mirrors through which it is expressed. Creation functions as a mirror for the divine. Each being reflects certain attributes: knowledge, beauty, strength, or even anger, allowing the infinite to see its own qualities in limited form. Just as light requires shadow to become visible, consciousness requires contrast to become self-aware. From this metaphysical perspective, your shadow, the parts of yourself you resist or overlook, is not separate from the divine flow. It is the way being experiences its own boundaries through you. Every quality exists only through its opposite. Mercy has meaning only in relation to wrath. Presence is intelligible only against absence. Being becomes perceptible only through non-being. This interdependence is not moral dualism, but ontological necessity. For the infinite to express its limitless nature, it must appear as limitation. The shadow hour, fears, weaknesses, and blind spots is, therefore, not a mistake, but the contrast through which awareness recognizes itself. Modern science echoes this logic. The visual system perceives not absolute brightness, but difference. Neurons detect contrast, enabling us to see edges and patterns. Perception itself depends on opposites. Psychologically, the same is true. Personality integration depends on recognizing disowned traits. When individuals deny anger, dependence, or vulnerability, these forces operate unconsciously, emerging as compulsions or moral rigidity. Integration occurs not by erasing the shadow, but by acknowledging it as part of the total system. To see through the shadow is to perceive how limitation serves illumination. Darkness, understood correctly, becomes information. One of Ibn Arabi's most original ideas is the imaginal world. This is not imagination as fantasy, but an ontological plane between spirit and matter where forms appear as reflections of consciousness. Your shadow self lives in that intermediate realm. It is the interface through which inner states become outer experiences. Dreams, emotions, and recurring life patterns all originate here, functioning as symbolic feedback from unseen dimensions of awareness. For example, the dream of being chased often corresponds to a repressed emotion demanding acknowledgement. In Ibn Arabi's cosmology, that dream is not just psychological content. It is a communication from the imaginal world, mirror signaling the need for integration. Neuroscience offers a parallel. The default mode network a brain system active during rest. Daydreaming and self-reflection overlaps with regions involved in dreaming and imagination. Emotional imagery precedes rational analysis, meaning the mind translates feelings into symbolic form before articulating them in language. What we experience as irrational emotion or coincidence may be consciousness translating unseen data into perceptible form. The shadow operates not below awareness, but alongside it, a neighboring dimension of experience rather than a buried one. In Ibn Arabi's metaphysics, the divine includes all attributes, both those humans call perfect and those they call flawed. Perfection itself requires polarity. Without contrast, there can be no recognition, no knowing. The divine names such as the merciful or the one who afflicts express this totality. Human traits, even the troubling ones, are reflections of these names appearing in partial form. Human imperfection is not a failure to be divine. It is the mode through which divinity becomes knowable. The friction between virtue and limitation generates the very awareness that seeks perfection. Learning and adaptation depend on prediction, error, discrepancy between expectation and outcome. The brain updates its models of reality only through mistakes. Likewise, consciousness evolves through the tension between knowing and not knowing, success and error. Thus, the shadow our imperfections, contradictions, and weaknesses functions as a teacher. Its resistance produces reflection. The path to self-knowledge is paved not by purity, but by the willingness to learn from the very forces that challenge us. Ibn Arabi summarized self-knowledge with a concise formula: he who knows himself knows his Lord. The journey toward divine awareness begins with recognizing the mechanisms of projection within the self. When individuals condemn traits in others' arrogance, envy, or deceit, they often react to their own unacknowledged tendencies. The outer world mirrors the inner field. The shadow forces confrontation by externalizing what consciousness denies. Modern psychology validates this process. Individuals selectively perceive stimuli aligned with their emotional preoccupations. If anger or insecurity is unresolved, attention unconsciously gravitates towards similar qualities in others. Research on mirror neurons further illustrates this. The same neural circuits activate when observing another person's emotion as when experiencing it oneself. This blurring of self and other explains why judgment often feels visceral. We are literally simulating in our brains what we think we reject. For Ibn Arabi, projection is not merely psychological but divine pedagogy. Each encounter serves as a mirror through which the self sees what it has refused to recognize. Every conflict is a test of perception. Integration begins when observation turns inward. The shadow is not opposed to light. It is made of light. Ibn Arabi writes, "The veil is none but the light itself." What obscures the real is not darkness, but excessive brightness consciousness perceiving only one aspect of itself. The veil is necessary because pure light is blinding. To see the infinite must veil itself in finitude. The shadow is that valve the modulation that makes perception possible. Each form, each limitation is a partial unveiling. The task of the seeker is not to tear the veil, but to perceive its transparency, to recognize that what appears as separation is the condition of revelation itself. The reactive, emotional, or hidden parts of the psyche are not obstacles to transcendence. They are the divine revealing itself under the mask of imperfection. Integration begins. With awareness, the ability to observe thoughts and emotions without immediate identification. When an emotion arises, the task is not to judge or suppress it, but to examine its function. Reflective journaling, dream interpretation, and mindfulness meditation parallel the Sufi practice of self-watchfulness. In both traditions, observation without reactivity gradually transforms unconscious impulses into conscious understanding. Studies on mindfulness show decreased emotional reactivity and increased regulation, indicating that awareness itself modulates emotion. Approaching rather than avoiding uncomfortable feelings reduces their power over time. In Ibn Arabi's framework, awareness corresponds to witnessing the self as a theater of divine manifestation. Awareness does not destroy the shadow. It renders it transparent, revealing the light it contains. The shadow that lives your life is not darkness battling light, but light refracted through limitation. It is the unseen principle that allows consciousness to encounter itself. Ibn Arabi's insight reframes the unconscious not as a psychological accident, but as a divine instrument of learning. Every imperfection, every emotion, every contradiction becomes part of the curriculum of being. To know your shadow is to know your wholeness. When awareness penetrates what was once denied, the mirror of perception clears, and what seemed like division reveals itself as unity. Illumination is not the absence of shadow, but its recognition as light in disguise. The shadow does not follow you, it as you, walking toward the light that you already are.